Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a video that I'm really excited about, that I have been looking forward to doing over the last couple of weeks, and that is the spoiler-free review for John Gwynne's new book, book number 1 in the Bloodsworn saga, The Shadow of the Gods. So I'd like to say thank you to NetGalley for giving me a copy of this book. I was really excited to get to be able to read it in advance of its release date, and I'm really excited to share my thoughts with all of you. If you have spent a little bit of time on the channel, then you know that I love John Gwynne's writing. I adored all the books in his Banished Lands saga, and I really like that style of kind of classic, heroic, epic fantasy. I think John Gwynne brings a lot to the genre, and he takes some of those typical or those expected heroic fantasy tropes, which clearly he loves so much, and he gives them a really unique and modern spin. I think that he does a great job of turning tropes on their head, and his characterization and pacing is all very admirable. These are the qualities that have made me fall in love with his past books, and he definitely brings these qualities and some new strengths to his newest series. Before we jump in and talk a little bit about the strengths and the weaknesses of the novel in particular, I just want to reassure everyone and set up the expectation or the understanding that this book starts the beginning of a completely new saga. This is not a companion or a continuation to the Banished Lands. This is its own unique fantasy universe and is a Norse-inspired world, and this is most definitely a place where you can jump into John Gwynne's writing without having experienced any of his other books. To get started, we'll just discuss a quick overview of the book, and then I'll talk a little bit about the plot and what really worked for me here. So the basic setup is that we have the land or the continent of Vigrit, I think. My pronunciation for Old Norse is definitely not amongst the best out there, but as far as I can tell from Googling consonants and vocal fricatives, that is the closest that I can come to a pronunciation. But we have this land which has been rent apart in cataclysm through the destructive battle of the gods. And these gods are borrowed from Norse mythology. We have Snaka, the snake god, who is the father of all. And then we have his children who have torn this world asunder through their battling. And we approach the story generations into the future, and we see how the people of the land are trying to make a life for themselves in this aftermath of the Great God War. And there still is a healthy dose of fear for these gods and the powers that they possess. And we see those fears come to life through a group of individuals called the Tainted. And these are the descendants, we'll say, of the gods, people who have the blood of the gods flowing through them. And they could have the blood of the wolf god or the blood of the bear god. And this blood gives them abilities or lets them tap into abilities that remain dormant. And because these people are feared and reviled and looked on as the cause of all the misery and destruction, they are hunted mercilessly and used as thralls or slaves to carry out their master's will. So we have this setup where we have the people of society living in this land. We have these Tainted who are living on the outskirts, trying to pass away in hiding, but are being ruthlessly hunted. And we have this world building that is heavily Norse inspired. The basic opening or the basic setup of the plot is that we have 3 main point of views. We have the character of Orca, who is a mother and wife and hell-bent on protecting her family at any cost. We have Elvar, who has a mysterious past and seems to be fighting for glory to try to escape what was expected of her. And then we have Varg, who is an escaped thrall who is trying to seek revenge for something that had been done to him when he was under the service of his previous master. And these stories all start off very distinctly. They start off very separately from one another. But in typical John Gwynne fashion, as these stories progress, we start to see how the threads may eventually come together. We see how the decisions of one character or one group of characters can have impacts on what is going to happen to the other characters. And even though it all starts off, like I said, very separately, and you may be wondering the direction that this is taking, you must have full confidence in John Gwynne. Always have confidence in John Gwynne is my recommendation or my advice, because he always knows where his story is going. I don't know his writing process. I don't know how detailed his plotting is, but he definitely knows how to weave a story and build up that action very purposefully and direct his characters in the direction that gives us the most payoff at the end. So the plotting here is exquisitely done. I really enjoyed following these characters, and I enjoyed seeing how, even though they're separated by distance or status or ambition, how the decisions that they make have long-reaching consequences across the world, consequences that can touch the other characters. I think that a couple of these storylines will probably hold more instantaneous appeal. Orca, who is, like I said, a mother, a woman who is fighting to protect her family, gives us that high-octane, quintessential, action-driven plot that we're expecting from John Gwynne. And I think that she will easily become a fan favorite. She is a total badass. She is ferocious. She is fierce, she is loyal, she is caring, she is so many of the things that we love to see in Gwynne's previous characters, and that is wrapped up in this kind of protective bond of motherhood. That fear for her child, that fear for her family keeps her moving and keeps her going. And there's something almost animalistic and primal in the way that she needs to fight for and care for her family. And it makes you instantly sucked into her story. It makes you care about what happens to her. It makes you fearful for the things that might happen, the actions that might be taken. And like I said, you are gripped instantly by Orca's story. I have no doubt that she will be a fast favorite for many people who read this novel. Similarly, we have Varg, who is the escaped thrall, who seems to be motivated by a need for revenge or a need to avenge someone who has been taken from him or someone who has been hurt by his previous masters. His backstory unfolds slowly. We get bits and pieces of his past life, and he is looking for someone to help him enact his revenge or help him discover what may have happened to the person he cares about. And so his fate becomes entwined with this group of warriors. And he's not even sure that he wants to be part of this warrior band, but he is so driven by his need to fulfill an oath that he has made that he will do anything. He will fight as hard as he can. He will carry out any number of unpleasant tasks. And I thought that he was a really compelling character to follow. In fact, I think Varg may have been my favorite character to follow. He is a phenomenal character, and I really enjoyed that we got to see both his gentle, compassionate side, and we got to see his completely irrational, completely revenge-driven side. I think that he is a character, you see that dichotomy in his character, and I think that he's very fascinating to follow. Another part of his story that is really, really nice is watching him develop bonds with people. As a thrall, he was treated as less than human, less than an animal. He had very little personal agency or autonomy. He could not make choices for himself. And when he is accepted into this new group, you see him trying to adjust to what we'll call civilian life or normal life, and it's very difficult for him. He has been treated as less than human for so long that it takes him a while to adjust to being part of just a regular group of people. And this is so interesting to watch and so very well done. I think that John Gwynne has completely hit the nail on the head with his characterization, and that made him my favorite person to follow within this story. Watching him grow and change and try to achieve the goals that he has set for himself, being tempted by things that he knows are not good for him or by people that he knows could possibly betray him, watching that war within himself, trying to put his newfound friendship up against his sense of duty, or put the new values that he is synthesizing, the new facets of his personality that he's growing, putting those up against that survival driven part of his brain that ruled him for so long, is such a fascinating development to watch carry out. And I really, really loved his story. The third character, and this is the one that I felt like it took me a little bit of time to adjust to, is Elvar. So Elvar is also part of a warband. She is part of the Battle Grimm, which is a warband that also has quite a good reputation. And she has left a home that we don't know a lot about initially in order to seek battle fame. She is a gritty, hardworking, determined character. And we can see initially that she really wants to shine in battle. She takes pride in being chosen for tasks. She takes pride when her accomplishments are noticed by her war chief or by the other members of her band. And we're not entirely sure why she's seeking this battle fame. We don't know her intrinsic motivations. And that does make it a little bit difficult to connect with her initially. Her story is interesting. I still found the chapters where we followed her to be very easy to read. I wanted to know what made her tick. I wanted to know what drove her forward. And there's a very distinct turning point, and everyone will know it when they get to it in the story. But there is a specific chapter where things click into place for Elvar's storyline, and you begin to understand her motivations. You begin to get a sense of the dynamics of her past life and what it was that she was trying to escape. And once that comes together, then her story will also expand greatly, and I think that you will find yourself very invested in her character, or at least that is how it played out for me. The secondary characters here are also fantastic. Much like in his previous series, John Gwynne does not sacrifice the development of his secondary characters for the benefit of his primary characters. There are standout secondary characters in this story, ones who I believe will become your favorites, and some of them are used to add levity, some of them add gravitas, some of them add world building. They all serve very specific functions in the narrative, but they don't ever feel like mouthpieces. They don't ever feel like talking heads. They are fully developed characters in their own rights, and I think that a lot of them will become quick favorites as well. I definitely have ones that I prefer, but I would like for people to go into the story and kind of make those judgments for themselves. So I won't talk a lot about the individual secondary characters, just to say that I think Gwynne does a phenomenal job with them, and I don't think that anybody will be disappointed. The characterization and the basic setup were things that I had come to expect from John Gwynne. So I expected to love these characters. I expected them to have depth, to have highly charged relationships, to have the virtues and the vices that really make them full and complete human beings, because those are the things that I have loved from John Gwynne previously. What I was not expecting was to see how much Gwynne has grown in terms of his world building and his crafting of this story. I think technically he becomes a better writer with time. We saw this evolution throughout the 7 books of the Banished Land series, and I think that technically this is John Gwynne at his best. The world building here, as I have mentioned, is heavily Norse inspired, but you can see how John Gwynne takes these elements and brings them to life. He makes them his own. The mythological creatures that he decides to integrate into this tale, the descriptions of the landscapes, the stark brutality of the world that has been left kind of in ruins. You can visualize that, and it makes for a very atmospheric read. John Gwynne's prose has always been very direct. It's been very accessible. It helps propel you through the narrative. And while I still think that that is true here, I also think that the writing and the world building combine to give us this atmosphere of a very bleak and brutal landscape. You can see why the characters have grown the way that they have, why they need to fight for what they believe in and what they stand for. And there is this mounting of tension throughout the first third of the book that is brought to life by the really rich and lush descriptions and by the writing. I am not someone who heavily relies on world building in fantasy. I care much more about the characters. I care about their motivations. But John Gwynne kind of melds the two in this story. The characters depend on their landscape. The landscape has shaped the characters. The history of this world has shaped what the characters decide to do, the decisions that they make. And it all blends together so, so wonderfully, making for a truly epic tale. Thematically, I think we see a little bit of what is John Gwynne's forte here. We see individuals struggling against their nature. We see that struggle between, it's not so much a struggle between good and evil as it was in the Faithful and the Fallen series, but more a struggle between nature and action. Does the way that you are born, does that impact or influence the type of person that you are going to be? Should the actions of your ancestors determine what is to happen to you in the present? Being the master of your own fate, standing up for what you believe in, fighting for your family. These are all ideas that are threaded together to build up the tapestry of these characters and the story that they play out. It is fantastic stuff. If you cannot tell, I enjoyed everything about this story. I would like to try to be balanced in the delivery of these reviews, even though I know that I love John Gwynne's writing, that it is going to instantly pull me in, that I'm going to be invested in his characters because I trust him, even if there are things that I feel like are left unexplored or left dangling in the first volume of a series. I trust that he is going to make that progress in a way that will be satisfying and that will culminate in this kind of epic conclusion. To try to point out some things that people may find a little bit more difficult or may hinder their enjoyment. I did find some of the phrasing to be a little bit clunky. I think John Gwynne does a great job of integrating little bits of jargon. For example, he calls someone's head or their mind their thought cage, which I thought was really clever, but it did pop up a few times kind of in a row, and that sometimes was a little bit jarring. It did take me out of the story a little bit, and I do find it difficult when, sorry, there's a hair stuck. I do find it difficult when authors do thread in that language as part of their world building, because it's something that I feel needs to be very organic, needs to arise very naturally. And when there are terms or words that we are unfamiliar with, they are automatically going to be recognized as other. And so I think they need to be kind of woven in very deftly. And for the most part, they were. But I think if you're very sensitive to those kinds of things, that repetition of certain phrases or words could be a little wearing after a while. As I have mentioned, I think Elvar's story takes a little longer to get into than the other two main POV characters. And there are a couple of twists or reveals that I don't think are going to shock you. Now, none of those things impaired my enjoyment of this book in any great way. I'm just really trying to nitpick to find things that I think might impair your enjoyment a little bit, or things that some people may be much more sensitive to than I am. I don't mind if I see a plot moving in a particular direction and the resolution that I expected is the one that comes about, as long as I feel like it comes from organic development of the characters, if the choices make sense in the context of the story. Much like in real life, we can see a lot of the train wrecks that are about to happen, and in literature we can do that too. And I think that there are some things that you can probably see are heading in a certain direction in this book, and they do in fact carry out the way that you were expecting. But again, I do not think that this will impair your enjoyment in any way. Overall, if you could not tell from my completely gushing sentiments, I really loved this book. I think that technically it shows how far John Gwynne has progressed as an author. I think we are offered characters who are very rich in terms of development and also very exciting to follow. It has his characteristic battle scenes, his characteristic pacing. I think that you become very invested in the story and the outcome very early. And of course, the conclusion of the novel in typical John Gwynne fashion is just an explosion of events that leave you both completely satisfied and desperate for the next volume. This is the first time that I have ever had to read a book by John Gwynne and wait for the next volume to come out, and it is going to be torturous waiting a year for this release. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I am so happy that BookTube has led me to John Gwynne's novels. I am so thankful that I was able to read this in advance, and I would highly recommend that not only do you read this book, but that you drop everything else that you're reading on May 4th and pick it up the day that it is released, because it is that good. I would love to hear if you have read this, if you've had an advanced copy. I would love to hear your thoughts about it. If you're looking forward to reading it, please let me know, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye.